Probably like most of you watching, I've been no-lifing Dark and Darker since the wipe. I probably have somewhere between 60 and 80 hours since then, and I've put almost all of them into Sorcerer. What I'm going to try and do in this video is distill all of that gameplay, knowledge, tips and tricks into less than 30 minutes. Let's see if I can do it. This video is going to be a monster, so please use the timestamps to jump around to whatever you find interesting. Some of the strengths of this class are, it's really fun to play. The particle effects and the spell merge are really, really cool. It has a really high skill ceiling, so there's a lot of room to learn and figure out the class as you go, and that's really rewarding. And I also believe the class is quite strong in PvP. When I first started playing, I thought the class was cool, but not strictly powerful. But I do think that Sorcerer is a really strong PvP class. On the flip side of that, class is pretty weak in PvE. I kind of think of it like Wizard, where your PvP is strong, but your PvE is pretty weak. And also your sustain is low, your general dungeon clearing is pretty bad. This can be slightly mitigated by the fact that you can use a longsword though, and the riposte helps you clear through mobs pretty quickly. The other con I'd say is that it takes a long time to figure out what you're actually doing. Like I'd say it probably took me 20 or 30 hours before I finally started to have an understanding of the class. The 4 perks that I like to run when playing solo Sorcerer are Spell Merge, Time Distortion, Spell Stride, and Spell Sculpting. Spell Merge is an easy choice. This is the bread and butter of Sorcerer. Time Distortion gives you instantaneous casting, but quadruples your spell cooldowns. And I've played around without this, but in solos, I feel like being able to get the spells off quickly when you're getting run down by a melee class is really important, and certainly worth the cooldown. So we're taking Time Distortion. It also helps with snap engages with Electric Dash that I'll talk about later. Spell Stride. The value of this perk is slightly negated by Time Distortion, because you don't spend very much time casting spells when you have Time Distortion up, because they cast instantly. But if you're holding a spell charged up, Spell Stride move speed bonus applies there still, so this has some value still, so we leave it in. Then the last one is Spell Sculpting. This one is giving you a little bit of extra range and size on your AoEs, and the biggest place where this comes into play is with Electric Dash and Lightning Sphere. The extra range on Electric Dash feels really good, and the extra radius on Lightning Sphere is pretty important when you're trying to stick on to people and slow them down. The 2 perks that we're not taking here are Apex of Sorcery and Manifold. Both of these perks fall into the same category for me, where I would rather have no perk than have this perk equipped, at least in the context of solo play. Apex of Sorcery and Manifold both are reducing your movement for more damage, and you just can't afford that in solo play. Maybe if you're playing in 3s and you're playing like a backline Sorcerer, you could get away with running these 2 perks. But Apex of Sorcery is making you basically stand still while you cast, and I don't think that's worth it. And Manifold is costing you 5% move speed bonus, which is 15 move speed. It's basically like running around the dungeon in just your bare feet, and that is not a worthy trade-off. So both these perks I'd rather not have. Apex of Sorcery, I thought it made sense with Time Distortion, because who cares if you can't move while you're casting if your cast time is 0? But not being able to move with the spell charged is really disorienting, and you just have to fire everything off the hip. It doesn't give you a lot of time to aim with a charged spell. So for these reasons, I think these 2 perks, I'd rather have nothing, no perk equipped, than these 2 perks. So that makes it pretty obvious. We pick the other 4. Now let's get into the fun part here with Sorcerer, which is the incredibly intimidating spell selection page. One tip here, if you're trying to just explore, is if you click on a combo spell on the left, a merge spell, it highlights the 2 individual spells that combine into this spell on the right side, where you would pick your spells. So if I wanted Lava Elemental, for example, you would drag Earth Elemental and Fire Orb into opposite sides of the wheel, and it tells you that you could cast this merge spell. This is not taking any spell memory, it's just saying if you cast these 2 spells at the same time, you could merge them. It does not work if they're on the same side, because then you can't cast them in opposite hands at once. Alright, now let's get into the spells that I think are really important for playing solo Sorcerer. The first one, and the bread and butter of this build, is Lightning Bolt and Vortex. As you can see, casting these 2 at the same time allows you to cast Electric Dash. This ability is super fun and very powerful. It deals damage both along the path and then at the destination. So if you hit them with the path of the dash and finish your dash on top of their character model, you're getting 20 damage in, which is nothing to scoff at, and they're electrified, so they're losing that 20% move speed bonus. This is like the bread and butter of the class for me. And one thing that was really important for my personal improvement for the class is realizing that you don't always have to cast these two spells as electric dash. These two spells together as a combo, even without merging them, just casting the individual spells at the same time, is really powerful for self-peel. Because Lightning Bolt is applying Electrified, so they're getting slowed, and then Vortex is this big AoE knockback with some damage on it. So very often, if I'm getting run at by a Cleric, a Fighter, or a Barbarian who doesn't have Iron Will, instead of dashing in, I will cast these two spells at the same time to slow them, knock them back, and then continue to slow them as they continue to try and gap close on me. So this is one part of Sorcerer that I really love, which is these two spells separately are both for self-peel, but if you combine them, you have an engage tool. So it gives you both options, but you need to be picky because if you use them individually, then they're on cooldown and you can't dash in. So you really have a lot of versatility with these two spells, and they're integral to playing Sorcerer. The next two spells that I would say are non-negotiable are Water Bolt and Fire Arrow. These two combine into Elemental Bolt, which is one of the biggest damage spells that the class has. It does a little bit less damage than Flame Frost Spear, but I believe it's more useful because the projectile speed is constant, unlike Flame Frost Spear, which has a little bit of lag and then an acceleration. But I find Elemental Bolt to be much easier to hit, and I also find more utility in casting the individual spells. Water Bolt you can use to clog doorways, so if a Barbarian's chasing you, you can throw a Water Bolt in the door, so he'll get slowed if he comes through. And then Fire Arrow, every single arrow, each of the 3 arrows has a 1.0 magical damage scaling on it, unlike the combined spell, which only has a 1.0. So if you can stuff somebody in the face with a Fire Arrow, you're getting triple value from your true magical damage, and that's a lot of damage. Hitting them with both Fire Arrow and Water Bolt separately would be more damage than just Elemental Bolt. So I tend to use Elemental Bolt at very long range because the range of both of these spells is pretty weak, but if it's a class that's pushing me or they're almost in melee range, I will actually cast these two spells separately and not merge them. The next spell that is core to playing Sorcerer in solos is Lightning Sphere. This spell is really strong because of the electrification, the move speed slow, and the damage is, they're both really, really powerful. At first glance, I thought of this as basically a melee only spell, but it's also a very strong melee deterrent. Like if you think you're about to get jumped by a rogue and you just pop Lightning Sphere, they're gonna lose the fight. So it can also be used as a deterrent in melee, if not like a direct melee all-in spell. This is basically the end of what I would consider mandatory. Now we're going to get into some of the optional spells. Most often I am taking Glaciate as one of my optional spells here. I often cast these two spells at the same time, Sphere and Glaciate, because those are kind of my preparatory melee spells before I electric dash in. So an example might be put Glaciate and Lightning Sphere on, and then electric dash in with the instacast, and then slow them with Lightning Sphere, slow them with Glaciate, and slow their action speed. The action speed slow is really important because your melee stats are really weak, so applying that action speed debuff gives you a fighting chance in melee combat. The next one that I am going to select here, at first I thought was pretty useless, but it has really grown on me the more I play Sorcerer, is Wind Blast. Damage is pretty weak. It's not nothing. It's half the damage of a zap, if you want to think about it that way. But the hitbox is huge. It's like a big cone, so it's really easy to hit. The range is actually pretty far, so it's kind of like free 10 damage now and then, and it's excellent self-peel. Another one that I've been taking recently is Stone Skin. It's not always useful, especially because the move speed penalty is a legitimate cost, but as we'll get into later, I think Barbarian is the hardest Sorcerer matchup, and this is directly useful in that 1v1. So I've been taking this recently just to try and ease the Barbarian matchup. Another option for a flex spell here is Flame Strike. And the reason why I like this so much is because Flame Strike and Wind Blast are a really cool combo together. They don't actually merge into a spell, but you can cast Wind Blast and Flame Strike at the same time, at the same location, and if the target continues walking at you, you can actually use the Wind Blast to knock them back and stall for long enough for the Flame Strike to erupt, because it has a little bit of a delay. So these two spells are a cool combo together. I've been leaning away from Flame Strike recently because the delay makes it quite hard to hit, but it has some utility. It can break pots, it can block doorways, but recently I have been leaning away from this combo, but these two spells together are pretty cool. Another one that I think is a super reasonable choice here is Eruption. In my mind, Eruption is kind of like baby Flame Strike. Like, there's less delay, but also less damage. Because there's less delay, it doesn't work as well with Wind Blast because you would probably knock them out of the Eruption. It also kind of functions as CC because it launches them up into the air, and if nothing else, it disorients them. The last spell that I think is worth considering here, at least for solo sorcerer PvP, is Levitation. It costs a lot of memcap, which is the reason why I don't run it, but kind of like Eruption, it's just really good for disorienting your opponents. Someone's running at you, you maintain your momentum while you're levitated, and you can cast this on an enemy, is what I find to be the most useful case. So let's say a cleric's running at you, you can cast Levitate, they'll get launched up into the sky and fly over your head, and you can run back the other way to build some distance. The memcap is the big deterrent for me though, so most of the time I'm running something like this with Stone Skin for more difficult melee matchups, or maybe Flame Strike. One tip for using Electric Dash is that if you start mashing the weapon swap key as your Electric Dash is going off, you can actually get your weapon out while you're traveling to a location. On Sorcerer, your dexterity is not too high, and the longsword has a pretty long equip time, which is the melee weapon I've been running. So being able to save that second in travel time in the Electric Dash is really useful. The next thing I want to do here is talk through the PvP matchups that you will encounter when playing solo sorcerer. I have them ranked here from easy to deadly. We'll start at the bottom and work our way up. I wouldn't consider this build melee sorcerer. You have some melee spells, but you have some pretty decent self-peel and some pretty decent melee spells, so I'd call this like a hybrid build. But that being said, you can basically function as an assassin with this build, and that makes classes that are purely ranged relatively favorable. The easiest example of that is Wizard, which is not a very strong solo class on its own, so that's part of the reason why it's at the bottom of easy tier here. If you lightning dash into a wizard with your lightning sphere on, they can't compete with you in melee, and they're not getting away. They don't have enough escape ability, so Wizard, I'd say, is pretty much a free win. Fighter and Cleric are both grouped almost as one entity in the easy category in my mind, with some slight differences, but the way I interpret both of these classes is that they basically want to close the gap on you, and they're not that fast, very often wearing plate armor. So these melee classes that you can just keep knocking back with Wind Blast, with Vortex, keeping at bay with the slow on Lightning Bolt, you basically can have your way with these classes. They can't really gap close onto you unless you make a mistake. I found even with plate fighters and plate clerics, if they go to engage with you at range, either with a bow on a fighter or with ranged spells like Holy Strike on cleric, if you can get your engage off, if you can electric dash in with your lightning sphere and glaciate up, you can win the engagement in melee if you get the jump on them while they have a ranged weapon out. So I feel like both of these classes you can quite easily kite out with displacements and slows, or even engage on if they try to take the fight at range. So in both cases, you have a favorable matchup against Fighter and Cleric, in my opinion. Moving on to the medium tier. The easiest one here, I think, in the medium tier is Warlock. I almost put Warlock in easy tier. The thing that ended up pushing it up to medium tier for me is anti-magic and just high will, which gives them high base magic resist. They take a little bit more damage to kill than something like a wizard, because the wizard doesn't have the same magic resistance. But almost all warlocks are taking Phantomize these days, and Sorcerer has a really good matchup into Phantomize as long as you're taking Lightning Sphere. Very often how the engagement goes is the Warlock's trying to cut you out with curses, but if you dash in with Electric Dash with Lightning Sphere up, they'll panic and they'll phantomize. And then once they phantomize, they're actually taking increased magic damage from Lightning Sphere. So you get to stick on them while they're in phantomize with your AoE going, and they're taking 50% increased damage. So if a Warlock phantomizes while you're on them, it's a big mistake. Maybe over time, Warlocks will learn not to panic in this way and press phantomize after the engage inside of Lightning Sphere. But for now, while people still don't really have a good idea of what Sorcerer is doing to them, most Warlocks are going to make that mistake and let you kill them with Lightning Sphere while they're in phantomize. Next up, we have Ranger and Bard, who are relatively similar in terms of Sorcerer matchup. I think both of these classes want to play at range. Of course, Ranger more than Bard. I would say against both of these classes, you lose a continued battle at range. Unless you hit a lucky Elemental Bolt headshot on one of these two classes, you don't really want to just trade range damage for range damage, because with instant cast, your Elemental Bolt will be on something like a 12-second cooldown, and these guys are shooting one arrow at you every second. So trading 12 arrows for one Elemental Bolt is not favorable for you. So for that reason, both of these matchups are similar to a Wizard or a Warlock, where your objective is to engage. If you can get on top of these guys, again with Lightning Sphere, similar to these other Wizard and Warlock matchups, I would say it's favorable but not a guaranteed win. Bard has some legitimate threat in melee with Shriek of Weak, and a lot of Rangers are taking shotgun these days. So if you dash in and a Ranger pulls out a shotgun, you're in a rough shape. If not for shotgun, I might put Ranger into the easy tier, but that alone is a one-shot threat. So barring a Shriek of Weak or a shotgun to the face, both of these classes I would say are slightly Sorcerer favored. Now we're moving into the hard category. Again, Druid and Rogue are grouped in the same way in my mind, kind of like Ranger and Bard are the same ranged type of class, and Fighter and Cleric are the same melee type of class. Rogue and Druid, what I'm seeing mostly now is Panther Druid in solos, and basically Panther Druid plays like a Rogue, and you end up in this kind of interesting scenario against these two classes where they both want to get on you and silence you with Cutthroat or Neckbite respectively, but they're both really squishy and have low base magic resistance. So Panther is just made of glass now, and Rogue has very low base magic resist. So the way I understand this matchup is basically whoever pulls the trigger first wins. If the Rogue gets the Cutthroat off on you, you're shit out of luck. And if the Druid gets in on you and hits you with a Neckbite, again, you're gonna lose that. But if you get in on them first with a Lightning Sphere up, that's a favorable melee engagement if you have Lightning Sphere and Glaciate, maybe even Stone Skin. So this is kind of just like whoever can get the engagement off first wins. Rogue is a little more difficult in my mind than Druid. I'm actually going to swap them like this because of the environmental factor of the dungeon and the surprise factor. Like, it's way more likely that you're going to get landmined by a Rogue with Cutthroat and just have no counterplay than, yeah, basically the way I interpret this is both of these guys want to get on you, and whoever pulls the trigger first wins. Last but not least, the bane of every sorcerer's existence, it's Barbarian. Thank God Iron Mace finally nerfed Barbarian this patch, but I think even with the nerf to Iron Will and Bust, Barbarian is still the classical rock, paper, scissors counter to these squishy magic casters. They're probably down maybe 8 or 10 points of health now after the nerf and down a little bit of magic resist, but I was finding people in normals, 124 normals with 180 HP on Barbarian, and you're running around with maybe 105 on Sorcerer. So it's a rough matchup. Plus Iron Will giving them all the magic resist they need. Like the knockback resistance on Iron Will that prevents you from peeling them is really crippling. You need to play against a Barbarian much differently than a Fighter or a Cleric because of knockback resistance. So where a Fighter or a Cleric, you can just knock them away with a Wind Blast or a Vortex when they get too close. Barbarians with Iron Will just walk right through it and try and hit you with Achilles. So this is definitely the hardest matchup because they're tanky, they have high magic resist, and above all that, they have knockback resist. Very often when I find a Barbarian, the first thing I'll do is try and hit him with a maxed range Wind Blast, just as like a test to see if he has Iron Will. If he has it, I'm feeling pretty bad. I'm trying to get out of there. But if he gets shoved back by the Wind Blast, then I think to myself, this dude's an inter. He didn't take Iron Will. And then the matchup is actually not so bad. If you do have to fight an Iron Will Barbarian, Some tips would be the doorway is your friend. So try and get through a doorway, put a water bolt in there to block the path. And then another thing you could do is use stone skin. So that's what I've been trying to do is stone skin gives you some extra PDR. It's 15%, it's no joke. I did the math and I think it gives you, if you have 130 health, stone skin gives you like an effective 30 or 40 HP against physical damage. So, and then the last thing, if you want it to be a total coward, is you could take off stone skin and maybe take summon elemental instead. And just use it as a door blocker, because barbarians with crush are going to follow you through the doorway, but they can't crush the earth elemental as fast. If you hate fighting barbarians like I do, and you're smarter than me, maybe you would take earth elemental and just block the doorway and run. But I can't help but want to erase barbarian scum from the face of the earth. So I find myself taking stone skin and trying to catch a longsword parry. This barbarian matchup is definitely barbarian favored, but even this is winnable if you play well and you get a good parry, basically. The next thing I want to do here is show you a couple different kits, one for 124 normals and one for 224 HR. One important thing to note here is that these builds are super expensive and super optimized, so it's just meant to give you an idea of something to work towards, and you can cut corners to make this whatever is appropriate for your budget. Start off with the 124 normal kit. The individual pieces can change, but what's important is the attribute prioritization I'm going to put up on screen here now. Basically, what you want the most is all attributes, followed by true magi, and then you work your way down the list. A couple important points here are, there are some thresholds you want to meet for strength and dexterity. So, strength, you no longer have a negative physical power bonus at 15 strength. So if you can get there, that's good. I don't quite get there here, but it's something to keep in mind. And for a longsword, I find a dexterity of 21 or 22 is where the weapon stops feeling so sluggish. So 15 strength is a good threshold to aim for. 21, 22 dexterity is a good threshold to aim for. And one last little tip here is that you don't want any more knowledge than you need. So when you have instant cast on, you're not using any additional spell casting speed that you get from knowledge. So just enough knowledge to hit the mem cap that you need here. See, I'm at 17 out of 17. No more, no less. And then max health rolls and all attributes wherever I can get it. A little bit of true magi here and there. If you want to see the exact items, you can pause at anywhere in this video where I'm hovering over them. Here's the 224 HR version. One important thing here is, you'll see I'm rocking a green weapon. And the reason why I do that is because you don't need a spellcasting weapon. So I put most of my gear score into my actual gear, my armor I mean, and less of it into the weapon. If you're trying to solo bosses, perhaps you'd want to put a little more gear score into the longsword and take some out of the rest of the kit. But I'll have the total up on the screen. I think this one cost me around 4,400 gold. Feel free to pause at any point if you want to take a look, but we got a green weapon, and then we have all attributes and true magi on all the jewelry and max true magi elsewhere. So something like this is what I would be thinking about running in 224 HR. If you enjoyed the video, or if you learned something about Sorcerer, please leave a like or a comment. Consider hitting subscribe. Most of my other content on this channel is shorts, but I bet you'll like it. I'm going to try making some more long-form videos like this when I can find a topic that seems appropriate. I'm also streaming live on Twitch sometimes. Check me out at MaxiCal. Links to all the other accounts are in the description below. Thanks so much for your time, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Good class or what?